Through his first 7 games of the 2020 NFL season, Dalvin Cook is on his way to possibly being in the MVP conversation by the time the end of the season comes around. With already over 1,000 total yards from scrimmage after his first 7 games of the season, Dalvin Cook is on his way to not only being an MVP candidate, but possibly having one of the best seasons we've ever seen from an NFL player. Although his first 3 games of the year saw him only rush for about 318 yards and 4 touchdowns, his last 4 games have seen him touch the ball 107 times with 713 yards from scrimmage, as well as 9 touchdowns. And the last 4 games include a game in Seattle where he actually left in the third quarter due to a groin injury. We saw what Minnesota's offense looked like in the one game that Dalvin Cook didn't play, and against the Atlanta defense that's really been struggling this season, Minnesota was really not able to get anything going both on the ground and in the air as Kirk Cousins threw 3 picks, and they ended up losing to the Atlanta Falcons. Through his 7 games that Dalvin Cook has played this year, he's been relied upon to be the main cog in the offense that really keeps the offense both on the field and putting points on the board. As the video title states, I have 5 main reasons as to why I think Dalvin Cook should be and possibly will be in the MVP conversations by the end of the NFL season. Before I get into those 5 reasons, I just want to remind you guys to like, comment, and subscribe on the video. If you like the content I put out, make sure you hit subscribe. If you agree with what I'm saying here, make sure you leave a comment down below and leave a like on the video. My first of 5 reasons as to why I think Dalvin Cook will be in the MVP conversation at the end of the year is the guy that I brought up earlier in Kirk Cousins. And it's not really what Kirk Cousins does in terms of his passing numbers, although if he is able to be a solid quarterback, that will help. His ability to limit his turnovers has been a huge key as to why Dalvin Cook has gotten up to a fast start. Kirk Cousins had 11 turnovers between both interceptions and fumbles lost in the first 6 games of the season. However, in the past 2 games against the Green Bay Packers and Detroit Lions, Kirk Cousins had 0 interceptions and 0 fumbles lost. And in those 2 games that Kirk Cousins had 0 turnovers, Dalvin Cook was able to rush for 163 yards against the Green Bay Packers and 206 yards against the Detroit Lions, as well as chipping in over 100 yards receiving between the 2 games as well. Although it's inevitable that Kirk Cousins will probably throw another interception or probably lose another fumble, if he is able to keep his turnovers to less than 5 or 6 over these next 8 games, then there's no reason why Dalvin Cook won't rush for over 100 yards and as well chip in probably 50 to 60 receiving yards per game as well. Kirk Cousins' ability to limit his turnovers over the past 2 games is actually what leads me into my next point. And that point is that many of the defenses that the Minnesota Vikings will be going against in these next 8 weeks don't do very well at turning over the opposing team. The only team that ranks inside the top 10 in terms of takeaways is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They rank 3rd in the NFL. However, nobody else ranks in the top 10, and in fact, every other opponent besides the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and New Orleans Saints ranks in the bottom 12 of the league in terms of takeaways. So like I said, if Kirk Cousins is able to keep these takeaways and turnovers to a minimum, then Dalvin Cook will have a field day against these defenses. My third point is still going to be involving takeaways, and that's that many of the offenses that Minnesota's defense is going to be going against over these next 8 weeks, teams like Chicago, Dallas, Tampa Bay, and Jacksonville, all rank in the bottom half of the league in terms of takeaway or turnovers, I should say. So that's just going to give the ball back to Dalvin Cook even more and will give him even more rushing yards. Possibly the biggest factor in terms of Dalvin Cook being able to keep up his historic pace is the fact that the defenses that he goes against in terms of their rushing ranks all rank inside the bottom 8 in terms of rush defense. The only 2 teams that don't rank inside the bottom 8 are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 3rd place and the New Orleans Saints in 1st place. Although Tampa Bay and New Orleans both rank inside the top 3 in terms of rush defense, we saw what Tampa Bay did against a running back like Alvin Kamara, who is somewhat sort of the same mold of a running back as Dalvin Cook. Tampa Bay really struggled at keeping Alvin Kamara, limited and bottled up. And when New Orleans, they haven't really faced a top-tier running back like a Dalvin Cook or like an Alvin Kamara that they have on their team. So it will really be the first test for New Orleans going against a top-tier running back, and we could see Dalvin Cook end up taking New Orleans' first-place rushing defense to the test and getting over 100 yards against them. And even if Dalvin Cook doesn't get over 100 rushing yards against the New Orleans Saints, he more than will make up for it with games against teams like the Dallas Cowboys, Chicago Bears, Jacksonville Jaguars. The Dallas Cowboys in one game gave up over 300 rushing yards to the Cleveland Browns earlier in this year, and they've also given up 200 rushing yards to teams like the Arizona Cardinals and the Washington Football Team. My fifth and final point as to why Dalvin Cook will probably end up in the MVP conversation at the end of the year is his similar stats to Adrian Peterson, who was the last running back to ever win the MVP award. The 2012 season for Adrian Peterson was the year in which he came up 9 yards short of breaking the single season rushing record held by Eric Dickerson at the time. And with 13 total touchdowns, 2,300 total yards, and 6 yards per touch, Adrian Peterson ended up taking home the MVP award. Dalvin Cook already through 7 games this year has the 13 total touchdowns that Adrian Peterson had in his 2012 campaign. There's a very good chance that Dalvin Cook ends up with 20 to 25 touchdowns as well. And given the fact that he already has 858 rushing yards, there's a chance that he has 17 to 1,800 yards to his total by the end of the year. At this point, really the only thing that Adrian Peterson has over Dalvin Cook is the record that the Minnesota Vikings finished with in 2012 compared to what the record is now for the team. In 2012, Adrian Peterson was able to rush the Minnesota Vikings to a 10-6 record, which did land them into a wild card spot in the playoffs. However, like I said, Dalvin Cook, even though the Minnesota Vikings at this point are only 3-5, there's a good chance that he's able to lead this team to 6 to even maybe even 8 wins over these final 8 games, especially given the fact that the teams that he's going against have a very poor rushing defense. And if he's able to rush for 150 plus yards in every single one of those games, I don't see why they couldn't go 8-0 and end up making the playoffs. And even if the Minnesota Vikings don't end up in a playoff berth, I think many people will look to blame Kirk Cousins, especially before they would blame Dalvin Cook, especially if Dalvin Cook ends up with 2,000 rushing yards, ends up with 20 plus touchdowns. And I think that would be enough to put him into the MVP conversation. For me, he already should be in the MVP conversation. However, if he does end up getting them to the playoffs, that only helps his odds at winning the trophy. If he doesn't end up taking home the MVP trophy, I don't see any reason why he shouldn't be at least the Offensive Player of the Year, even though it's kind of, the MVP ends up being the Offensive Player of the Year anyway. However, I think Dalvin Cook, at the very, very least, should be Offensive Player of the Year. I think he could, in fact, win the MVP award. And if Minnesota ends up going to the playoffs, maybe winning a game or two, and Dalvin Cook ends up averaging over 150 yards per game from on the ground, I don't see why he shouldn't take home the MVP award. With all of that being said, that's going to be the video for me. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you leave a like or leave a dislike, whichever. However you felt about the video. Any feedback from you all this much is much appreciated. If you are a Vikings fan, Dalvin Cook fan, or NFL fan in general, make sure you leave a comment down below what you thought about the video. And make sure you hit subscribe. I try to put out as much content as possible. And I'll see you all in the next video. Peace.